My name is Arthur Finch, and for most of my 52 years, I've lived a quiet life here in Maple Creek, Ohio. This town is the kind of place that prides itself on its tranquility. We have old maple trees that form a leafy canopy over the streets in the summer, and in the fall they blanket the sidewalks in a riot of red and gold. People here know their neighbors. They wave when you drive by. They bring you casseroles when you're sick. It's a good place, a place where the loudest sound you usually hear after 9 o'clock at night is the distant whistle of a freight train or the chirping of crickets. My life fit right into that picture. I work from home, a meticulous restorer of antique clocks. It's a profession that requires patience, a steady hand, and above all, silence. In my workshop, surrounded by the gentle, rhythmic ticking of dozens of timepieces, I found my peace. This house, this workshop, this quiet life. It was all I had left of my late wife, Eleanor. She loved this house. She's the one who planted the rose bushes that line the front walk. Every tick of every clock was like a heartbeat in the home we built together, a constant, comforting reminder of the life we shared. My world was small, ordered, and predictable, and that's exactly how I liked it. It was a fragile ecosystem of memory and routine, one that I guarded fiercely. Then he moved in. 3 houses down the street, a man I would come to know only as the source of a profound and shattering noise. I never got his name. To me, he was just the biker. He had the look, a leather vest that had seen better days, arms covered in faded tattoos, and a permanent sneer etched onto his face as if he just tasted something sour. And he had a motorcycle. It wasn't just any motorcycle. It was a Harley-Davidson with straight pipes, which, if you don't know, is like hooking a jet engine directly to your eardrums. The first time I heard it, it was a Tuesday night, a little after 1 in the morning. I was in my workshop, carefully reassembling the escapement of a 19th-century grandfather clock, a delicate piece that required my full concentration. Suddenly, the silence of Maple Creek was not just broken, it was violently ripped apart. A deafening roar, a guttural, angry blast of sound erupted from down the street. It was so loud the windows in my workshop rattled. The tiny gear I was holding slipped from my tweezers, bounced off the workbench, and vanished into the shadows on the floor. The sound grew louder, a wave of pure mechanical fury washing over the neighborhood as he thundered down our quiet street, full throttle. It felt like a violation, a personal attack on the very fabric of our town's peace. Then just as quickly as it began, it faded into the distance, leaving behind a ringing in my ears and a lingering smell of exhaust. I spent the next hour on my hands and knees with a flashlight, searching for that tiny, irreplaceable brass gear. I found it eventually, but the peace of the night was gone, replaced by a simmering anger. I hoped it was a one-time thing, a fluke. Maybe he was moving in or had an emergency. I was wrong. This was not a fluke. This was the beginning of my problem, the arrival of my nemesis. The man on the Harley was a threat to my world, and I had no idea how deeply he would shake it. My first attempt to solve the problem was to do nothing at all. I am, by nature, a non-confrontational man. I believe that most problems, if you leave them alone, will eventually sort themselves out. So, after that first night, I told myself it was an anomaly. A guy showing off his new toy, perhaps. But then, a few weeks later, it happened again. This time it was 3 in the morning on a Saturday. The same violent roar, the same full-throttle departure that woke me from a deep sleep, my heart pounding in my chest as if I'd been startled by an explosion. An hour later he came back, the sound announcing his return from miles away, growing from a distant rumble to a street-shaking crescendo right outside. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock on my nightstand, a sound that usually soothed me but now seemed fragile and vulnerable against the memory of the Harley's roar. The next morning I saw some of my neighbors out doing yard work. I walked over to Mrs. Gable, a sweet woman in her 70s who was tending to her prize-winning petunias. "Did you hear that noise last night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Her face tightened. "Oh, Arthur, it was dreadful," she whispered, looking around as if the biker might overhear. "Woke me and my little cat Mittens right up. The poor thing hid under the bed for an hour." I talked to Mr. Henderson next, a retired factory worker who was always washing his car. He was less diplomatic. "That punk," he grumbled, scrubbing a tire with unnecessary force. "Someone ought to teach him a lesson, wakes up the whole block." But when I asked if anyone had thought about calling the police, they all just shrugged. "What's the point?" Mr. Henderson said. "By the time they get here, he's long gone." It was clear that while everyone was annoyed, no one was willing to do anything. The responsibility, it seemed, was falling to me. My next step was to try the official channels. Our town has noise ordinances. I looked them up online. There were specific rules about excessive noise, especially between the hours of 10 at night and 7 in the morning. The biker was flagrantly violating them. So the next time it happened, a Thursday around 2:30 in the morning, I called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation calmly and clearly to the dispatcher. She sounded tired but polite. "We'll send a car to check it out, sir," she said. I sat by my front window for 45 minutes. No police car ever came. The biker returned an hour later as loud as ever, and I felt a fresh wave of frustration. I tried again the next time and the time after that. Once, a police car did actually cruise slowly down the street, but it was a good 20 minutes after the biker had already left. It was a pointless gesture. I realized the flaw in the system. It was reactive, not proactive. They wouldn't just sit and wait for him. As Mr. Henderson had predicted, by the time they responded, the crime against our ears was already over. I even found out that a police officer lived on the street, almost directly across from the biker. I could not for the life of me figure out why he never did anything. Maybe they were friends. Maybe he worked nights and was never home to hear it. Or maybe, and this was the most disheartening thought, he just didn't care. The system, the very thing designed to maintain order, was failing me. The problem was not getting smaller. It was becoming a regular feature of my life, a recurring nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. With the official channels exhausted and my neighbors unwilling to act, I knew I had to take a step I had been dreading. I had to confront him directly. I spent days rehearsing what I would say. I didn't want to be aggressive. I wanted to be reasonable. A simple conversation between two neighbors. I waited for a Saturday afternoon when I saw him outside, polishing the chrome on his monstrous machine. My heart was pounding as I walked down the sidewalk. My hands felt clammy. This was so far outside my comfort zone. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding weaker than I intended. He looked up, his eyes shielded by dark sunglasses. He didn't smile. "Yeah, what do you want?" he grunted. I took a breath. "I'm your neighbor, Arthur Finch, from a few houses down," I began. "I was hoping I could talk to you about your motorcycle." He stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He was taller than I thought, and his presence was intimidating. "What about it?" he said, his tone flat and challenging. "Well," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "it's a beautiful machine, but it's quite loud. When you leave late at night, it wakes up a lot of people. I was wondering if you could possibly, just roll it down to the end of the street before you start it up. Or maybe not go full throttle through the neighborhood." He stared at me for a long moment, and then he let out a short, barking laugh. It wasn't a friendly sound. "You're kidding me, right?" he said, taking a step closer. "You want me to push my bike down the street in the middle of the night? Let me give you some advice, old man. You don't like the noise, buy some earplugs. Or better yet, mind your own business." He turned his back on me, dismissing me completely, and went back to polishing his chrome. I just stood there, speechless and humiliated. I had tried to be polite, to be rational, to be a good neighbor, and he had laughed in my face. As I walked back to my house, the feeling of humiliation slowly curdled into a cold, hard anger. He wasn't just inconsiderate, he was malicious. And my attempt to solve the problem had not only failed, it had made everything so much worse. I knew it had gotten worse that very night. Around midnight, the Harley roared to life, but this time it was different. He didn't just start it and leave. He let it idle in his driveway for a full 5 minutes, revving the engine every 30 seconds, sending shockwaves of sound that vibrated through my floorboards. It was deliberate. It was a message. He was telling me that he was in charge, that my complaint had only amused him. He was punishing me for speaking up. After that, the late-night rides became more frequent, more audacious. Sometimes he would do it 3-4 nights in a row. The peace of Maple Creek was a distant memory. My quiet sanctuary had become a torture chamber where I was forced to wait for the next sonic assault. My work suffered. My hands would tremble, making the delicate clock repairs impossible. I started having trouble sleeping even on quiet nights, lying awake in anxious anticipation. The whole neighborhood was on edge. Lights would flick on in house after house every time he started his engine. I could feel the collective resentment hanging in the air, but still, no one did anything. They just peered out from behind their curtains, prisoners in their own homes. The low point, the moment I felt all hope was truly lost, came on a rainy Tuesday night. I was working on a special project, a beautiful, intricate model of a sailing ship, the Aliner, which I was building in memory of my wife. She had always dreamed of seeing the ocean, a dream we never got to fulfill. Building these ships was my way of taking her there. I was in the process of rigging the tiny, thread-like ropes to the masts, a task requiring immense concentration. At exactly 2:17 in the morning, the Harley exploded to life, louder than ever before. The sudden, violent sound made me jump and my hand jerked. The delicate mast, which I had spent a week carving, snapped in two. I stared at the broken piece of wood, the tiny ropes dangling uselessly. And in that moment, something inside me broke too. It wasn't just a piece of a model ship. It was a piece of my connection to her, shattered by this man's selfish, arrogant cruelty. He wasn't just robbing me of sleep anymore, he was desecrating my memories. I sank into my chair, the roar of the motorcycle fading into the distance, and I felt a profound and utter despair. I had tried reason. I had tried the law. I had tried direct appeal. Every attempt had failed, and now he had taken something from me that I could never truly get back. It was in that moment of absolute defeat, sitting in my silent, violated workshop, that the quiet, patient Arthur Finch died, and a new man, a man capable of revenge, was born. I didn't have a grand, sudden revelation. The idea for my revenge came to me slowly, quietly, in the days that followed the breaking of the Aliner. I stopped calling the police. I stopped talking to my neighbors about it. I just went about my days, a cold, hard knot of anger sitting in my stomach. The biker continued his nightly assaults, emboldened and unopposed. I think he believed he had won, that he had broken the old man down the street. He was wrong. He had only hardened me. One afternoon I was cleaning out my garage, a space that hadn't been properly organized since Aliner passed. In a dusty corner behind a stack of old paint cans, I found a cardboard box. It was heavy. I opened it and saw they were roofing nails, a 5-pound box left over from when we'd had the roof redone years ago. I stared at them, their sharp points glinting in the dim light. My father had been a roofer, a practical man who believed in using the right tool for the job. And as I looked at those nails, I realized I had found my tool. It wasn't a brick through his window or a cable across the road. Those were acts of chaotic violence. This was different. This was precise. It was targeted. It was a consequence. A plan began to form in my mind, a final, last-ditch effort to reclaim my peace. I would not confront him again with words. I would deliver a message he couldn't ignore, one that would speak to him in a language he understood: damage and inconvenience. I waited. I let him have his fun for another week, his arrogance growing with every thunderous departure. I needed him to be comfortable, to be unsuspecting. Then on a Wednesday night, after he tore through the neighborhood at 1:30 in the morning, I knew it was time. The climax of this long, quiet war was at hand. I had to dig deep to find a version of myself I didn't know existed and risk everything to make one final attempt to solve this problem. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The air was cool and still. I went to the garage, the cardboard box of nails feeling heavy in my hand, a weight of purpose. I didn't take the whole box. My plan was incremental. A warning shot first. I scooped a large handful of the nails, their sharp points pricking my palm, and put them in my coat pocket. On my way to run my morning errands, I drove down my street, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. As I approached the biker's house, I saw it, parked right at the end of his driveway, the gleaming chrome monster that had haunted my nights. My hands were steady on the wheel. I slowed my car to a crawl, rolled down the passenger side window, and with a quick, deliberate flick of my wrist, I tossed the handful of nails onto the asphalt, right in the path of his tires. They scattered with a sound so quiet it was almost non-existent, a tiny metallic patter that was the polar opposite of the noise he created. I didn't stick around to watch. I just drove away, my face a neutral mask, a storm of anxiety and grim satisfaction swirling inside me. For the next few days there was silence, blessed, beautiful silence. I worked on repairing the mast of the Aliner, my hand steady for the first time in months. I slept through the night. I started to hope, to believe that my message had been received. He must have found the nails, maybe even gotten a flat tire, and finally understood that his actions had consequences. The quiet lasted for almost a week. But then, the following Tuesday, just after 2 in the morning, the roar returned. It was a punch to the gut. The sound was just as loud, just as arrogant as ever. He hadn't gotten the message. Or worse, he had, and this was his answer. My warning shot had failed. My hope crumbled into dust. But the despair I had felt before was gone, replaced now by something cold and absolute. There would be no more warnings. The next morning I did not hesitate. I went back to the garage and picked up the entire 5-pound box of roofing nails. This was it. This was the final attempt. There was no turning back. As I drove toward his house, the box sitting on the passenger seat next to me, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was no longer the frightened, humiliated man who had tried to reason with him. I was an instrument of justice, delivering a consequence that he had earned 100 times over. His bike was in the same spot, a monument to his own ego. I didn't even slow down much this time. I leaned over, grabbed the box, and with a single fluid motion, I appended the entire thing out the window. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of roofing nails cascaded onto his driveway, fanning out in a wide, dense carpet of sharp steel points. They landed with a soft, satisfying shower of sound, a final, decisive statement. There was no way he could miss this. There was no way he could avoid this. I drove away, and I did not look back. That night I went to bed, and for the first time I felt certain I would not be woken up. I was right. The night was silent. The next day I drove past his house on my way to the grocery store. The motorcycle was gone. The driveway was clear. A week went by, silence. A month, pure, uninterrupted peace. The quiet returned to Maple Creek. Mrs. Gable's cat Mittens no longer hid under the bed. Mr. Henderson went back to just washing his car, a content look on his face. The gentle ticking of the clocks in my workshop was once again the loudest sound in my world. I finished my model ship. I glued the repaired mast in place, and it was stronger than before. I christened it the Aliner, and I placed it on the mantelpiece, a tribute to my wife and a monument to my victory. My new normal was my old normal, but it felt different. It was a peace I had fought for, a quiet I had earned. I had changed. I had discovered a line within myself I never knew existed, and I had learned what I was capable of when that line was crossed. Months passed. The fall came, and the maple trees shed their fiery leaves. The memory of the biker and his Harley began to fade like a bad dream. The house 3 doors down had a for sale sign in the yard for a while, and then a new family moved in, a quiet couple with 2 young children. Life was good. Then one Saturday I was at the local hardware store picking up some wood glue. As I was heading to the checkout, I saw a familiar figure in the aisle over. He was limping, favoring his right leg, and his arm was in a sling. The leather vest was gone, replaced by a cheap windbreaker. It was him, the biker. Our eyes met for a second across a display of garden hoses. There was no anger in his eyes, no defiance. There was something else, recognition, and maybe even a flicker of fear. He quickly looked away, paid for his item, and hurried out of the store as fast as his limp would allow. I felt a surge of vindication. It was a silent, final confirmation that my plan had worked, perhaps more effectively than I had ever intended. I walked to the checkout, a small smile on my face. As the cashier rang up my glue, my eyes fell on the item the biker had just purchased, left on the counter by mistake before the clerk bagged it. It was the user manual for a brand new, top-of-the-line, battery-powered, whisper-quiet electric lawnmower. The irony was so perfect, so poetic, it was almost beautiful. He had not just been silenced, he had been converted. I paid for my glue, walked out into the crisp autumn air, and took a deep, peaceful breath. The war was truly over.